I'm your moderator. For the evening. And while I am not Ron Kersop, the amazing moderator of previous book club installments, I'm super excited to be here and will do my very best to present your questions about library personnel to the Handbook's authors, Rebecca and Jerry. The purpose of the New York State Trustee Handbook Book Club is to provide explanations and insights for more than 6,000 library trustees in New York State. Each book club session takes a deeper dive into one chapter of the Trustee Handbook and answers real-life questions received from the field that arise in the areas of governance work for library boards. Before we begin, let's quickly get acquainted with each other using the technology we've been provided. If you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button and a chat button. I'll reference the Q&A feature shortly, but for now, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself to your colleagues by placing your name, your library, and how many years you've been a trustee in the chat box. And I'll say that one more time for those of you that are just joining us. Please share your name, your library, and how many years as a trustee in the chat box. As all of you say hello in the chat, I'm going to quickly and proudly introduce two of our planning team members. The first individual is Casey Conlon. Casey is Mid-Hudson Library Systems Sustainability Coordinator. In addition to helping us prepare for all book club installments, Casey is online with us tonight to help you troubleshoot any technical issues, as well as help us manage the chat box. The second person is my co-moderator, Ron Kersop, Executive Director of the Pioneer Library System, and a member of our planning team for the Trustee Handbook Book Club. He is also online with us tonight and helping with the chat box. Now, I would be remiss if I did not shed light on our co-promotional sponsors. It is these organizations that continually support libraries and work tirelessly to advance our greater mission for the benefit of all people. Thank you to the New York State Library, the Public Library System Director Organization, the Library Trustees Association, and the Public Library section of the New York Library Association. We take comfort in knowing these institutions remain steadfast on our behalf. This evening, we're discussing the third installment of the Trustee Handbook that assists library leaders with better understanding the relationship between board, director, and most specifically, personnel. We will chisel out 90 minutes to receive an overview of the topic from the handbook's authors, Rebecca and Jerry. They will also provide answers to frequently asked questions, which were sent in advance by our viewers. Thank you to those who submitted ahead of time because it does allow us to better prepare for the evening. Following that, I'll moderate the open Q&A by those of you who are attending the live session. When you have questions for Rebecca and Jerry, please place them in the Q&A area by selecting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This is the best place for all questions because it'll allow me to organize them in the same order they are addressed in the handbook. If you have general comments or you'd like to share with your colleagues, like what I think Rebecca just said is right on, or can someone share a link to that document that Jerry just referenced, please feel free to put those comments in the chat area by selecting the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully, we'll receive as many questions this month as we did in October and November. The more questions, the better. Planning team members have been curating your questions, so we get to all of them as part of our pre-recorded book club after party session. Video of the after party will be released in January of 2022 and feature most unanswered questions from all three book club sessions that took place October through December 2021. You can find the book club after party recording, previous book club recordings, as well as our self-guided toolkits that you and your board can use to spark your own conversations at our project's website, midhudson.org/trustee book club. And I believe Casey's going to put that in the chat shortly. While most of you probably already know the authors of the Trustee Handbook, Rebecca Smith Aldrich and Jerry Nichols, I think it is always important to formally introduce them because they have done so much for us and our greater New York library community. Rebecca Smith Aldrich is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System. Along with co-authoring the Handbook for Library Trustees of New York State, she has also authored the Companion Handbook for New Library Directors in New York State and the Municipal Ballot How-To Guide, as well as 2 books for ALA editions. Jerry Nichols has distinguished himself as a leader in public library services, as a library director, library system director, and library educator. He is also considered one of New York State's most authoritative experts in library management, finance, law, and construction. I think I speak for all members of the project's planning team when I say any time spent with Jerry and Rebecca is time well spent, because it empowers us to be better leaders of this profession that we care so much about. Right now, I'd like to invite Rebecca and Jerry to kick us off with the third installment of the Trustee Handbook Book Club. It's all you guys.
Well, thank you, Brian. Brian is one of the most gracious colleagues that I know I have here in New York State. So I want to thank Brian for moderating this evening, and thank Jerry, my colleague, for being here once again to present with me. We're making up for lost time because we went for probably 2 decades with never presenting to each other, and now I get to present with him every month, which is fantastic.
Well, Rebecca, I tell you, it's an honor and a privilege for an old man to be able to work with today's library leaders, and it's great. Thank you for letting me tag along.
Not at all. So tonight we are going to do similar to what we did the last 2 sessions, which is to give you just some basic introductory information to cover some of the questions that came in ahead of time. We're tackling a really important topic tonight, which is personnel. And we got a ton of questions that came in ahead of time on this topic. So we're going to do our best to cover them all. We just want to point out right at the outset here that many of you come from a work life in which you have a hierarchical management relationship, wherever you are on the food chain, in your workplace. You're very used to either reporting up or reporting or managing down. And so what we're going to do tonight is talk about how different the role of a board is as it relates to your director and the staff of the library, and some best practices to help protect the library, to keep relationships going smoothly, and to make sure your community is getting the best possible service from your library, thanks to staff that are well chosen, well cared for, and protected through the policies and plans and budgets that you produce. So one of my favorite quotes about library land of all time is from Tim Healy, who's the former president of the New York Public Library, who said the most important asset of any library goes home at night. It's the library staff. And I thought about this quote so often in the past 2 years, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, when speaking with legislators, and we would talk about how libraries were managing in the face of the shutdown order from the executive office of New York State. And they kept saying, oh, it's so sad our libraries are closed. And I was very quick to correct them. I said, our libraries are not closed. Just the library buildings are closed, because our staff were so hard at work figuring out what it looked like to meet the needs of our community during a really challenging time, which has continued on much longer than any of us anticipated. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is, kind of that angle. I don't want to sound too kind of crass about it, but it's a risk management topic for sure. But it's also really such a privilege to work with library people. It's my favorite part of my job, I know that much. The people that you meet both on library boards and who work in libraries are some of the best people on the face of the earth. Your library staff are beloved by many people in your community. You'll hear them thanked in the valedictorian speeches at your local high school. You'll see their names in the acknowledgement page of authors' books. You'll see parents bring their children back to their hometown library so their kids can meet their children's librarian. They're just such special people that have a massive impact on those that you serve. And they really do have that common mission in mind, to deliver service that matters to people. So your responsibility related to their workplace and how they're treated and compensated, and what you do when challenging situations arise, it really couldn't be more important. So thank you for taking the time to be here tonight to learn more about this topic and get your questions answered. So I'm starting with a super boring slide, which is a list of personnel policies. I just always start with kind of your origin documents related to tough topics. And this is a list that's it's all but one thing you'll find in the list in the trustee handbook of the sample checklist of policies that you should have. And personnel policies are extremely important for a variety of reasons. Not only do they ensure that your staff are treated equitably as they work in your library, it helps your director know what to do in sometimes unique situations that can arise, or infrequent situations that arise. But it also ensures that you're managing risk for the library, because the area of personnel is actually your #1 area of liability when it comes to who gets sued in the nonprofit world. the number one area of lawsuits is in the area of personnel. So a complete set of personnel policies is really critical. This is a great list to use to jump off from and compare this to perhaps your personnel policies or employee handbook. There are HR firms that are out there that can help you develop these. If you don't have this or you're missing critical components of it, they should all be reviewed by a lawyer, and your director should have full access to all of these. This is incredibly important to making sure things go well as you intend them to, as having these things in writing and making sure everything is very, very clear. We're going to refer back to some of the items on this policy page as we work through the content tonight. We want to make sure you have this. You'll get this copy after the session tonight. But again, this matches very, very closely the checklist that you'll find in the trustee handbook today. So Jerry, did you want to add anything on the policy page before we move on?
I just want to thank you for taking that very boring slide and making it interesting. I once had to do a program on policies, and I entitled it, "I hate to make policies helpful for people that must." Well, you guys must. You have to do this. And they have to be reviewed frequently. And when you become a board member, you need to read them. And after, at least once a year, you need to go through this stuff. So kudos to what Rebecca said. Couldn't say it better. You've got to take care of this stuff. My turn. Okay. One of the biggest problems that I've always heard of libraries is, oh, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. What do you expect us to pay our people? And of course, this goes back to the concept of how much are library staff worth? How much is the library worth in your community? And I want to go back to our very first program together, and we started with, what's your mission? If you think it's important to your community to have a library, and to have a library that is valuable to your community, then you need to invest in that, this product that you're trying to put forth. And that means investing in your people, as well as your books and your videos and your databases and whatnot, because all of those things are meaningless. You can have a warehouse of books and resources all you want, but without that interaction with people, they're almost worthless, except to a few people. But to your community, that's what the library means. It's the faces they see when they come in there. And let me make up a new phrase. You get what you pay for. We know that there's a lot of challenges now because people can get paid a lot more at McDonald's. But you should know that historically, more kids' first job in their lifetime is at a library than it is at McDonald's. So we expect and hope that you will value your staff. I'll just relate one story. I did a workshop for NILA many years ago, and the question was, how much should we pay our director? And we'll get to the director in a minute. But my question was, well, look around in your own community. I can't tell you what your staff is worth, but what are the clerks at your village hall making? What is the local teachers making? What is the local school principal making? And balance that, because your community is paying for those services. And if your people are as good as those people are, then why are you paying them less? And the same goes with benefits. These days, how important benefits are. Those of you that don't have a good retirement system lose people all the time, or you don't get people in the first place. So you need to think that through. The second point on this particular slide is a lesson. Again, I tell stories, but when I first became the director of the Suffolk Library System, we were the busiest library system in the United States. We're very proud of that. Nobody was close. And it's just because we had a lot of well-supported suburban libraries that valued education, and we had a lot of aggressive libraries. When Gary Strong became the director in Queens, Gary, who then moved on to become the director at UCLA, within 2 years, he left us in the dust. So I called him up and asked him to come out and tell us all how he beat us so badly when it came to circulation, nationally. And it was simple. He said, well, I broke a long-standing tradition of the city libraries. I let people work in their own branches where they lived. It was that simple. All I ended up doing was having the library reflect their community. So when people walked in the door, they saw someone that looked like them, spoke like them, understood them, and that's all we had to do. And that's all you have to do in order to make your library a welcoming place, especially those communities that are having different populations that are going through great demographic changes. You need to make it welcoming. And what's welcoming is people that your community can relate to. So that's your business. And don't give me this stuff about civil service prevents us from doing that. No, they don't. That's just an excuse. I lived with civil service for 40 years. There's ways that you can still make real inroads in having your library staff reflect your community. As to investing your staff, I'm going to hand this back to Rebecca right now.
I think that the idea of investing in staff, it's not just the salaries and benefits, it's the work environment that they find themselves in. It's the investment in their education. We've had folks that have worked at libraries for a decade or more, and library land and services look so much different than they did when they started. We need to give them a fighting chance to be successful on our behalf. So this talking point here on this slide, I just really wanted to kind of think maybe a little differently when you're building your budget about where you're investing money. You're investing money in your collections to just have more and more and more, but your staff are over here wondering, I don't even know how to use that device the library just bought, or what is this new policy development that impacts youth services? They need a chance to learn from other people in the field if they've been out of library school for a while or never went to library school. And I think that investment in them makes them very loyal to your organization when they understand you care not only about their well-being, but their ability to be successful in that job. And really, you might be surprised to see that I put facility stewardship related to this, but this is a huge school of thought. As we think through staff wellness, they spend an enormous amount of time in your facility. When you think about how much time you yourself spent at work in the workplace, maybe that's different now the pandemic hit and some of you get to work from home, but working in one facility for a long time, really you need fresh eyes to come in and take a look at their working conditions, at workflow issues. We just redesigned our delivery area here at Mid-Hudson, and we did a focus group with the staff to say, what do you love the most about this space? What are the biggest challenges you have in this space? And we learned things we had no idea they were contending with. And with the investment of just a few $1,000s, we made their everyday life better. They're more comfortable in that workspace. Their job is easier. They're able to be more productive. And it was such a small investment of time, energy, and money to make that better. So a lot of these things is just asking a question or two to find out how things are going and making sure when the budget is built, it's responding to really, as again, that most important asset is your staff. And probably your second most important asset is going to be your facility. So those things definitely go hand in hand. So just some, mindset issues for you when you're talking about the budget for the coming year. These are all worthy investments that really enhance the ability of staff to produce quality library service on the behalf of your community.
Two quick points, and Rebecca may remember, because when I taught a facilities course for library directors, after the first class, I tell them, go back to the library and ask one of your staff members how you can make their job easier. What can you do to improve the way the traffic flow works in their department, the way the furniture is laid out? And every time they come back, and somebody had a better idea than they did, because they weren't living in that space all day long, every day. And by the same token, when I work with boards about doing a library project construction, I'd sometimes just tell them to grab their coats, let's walk outside, and we go down the block. I tell them to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and now let's go visit the library like a patron does. And tell me what you see, including the cigarette butts on the street, the duct tape on holding your carpet together, if it's dirty, if it's bright, and it always made a difference to get, as Rebecca said, look at it with fresh eyes. So we encourage you to do that. One last thing, I want to go back to the first point, and this does work, folks. Many times we have heard the argument that we can't pay people. There's so many people that work here. There's too many people that work here. There's always the excuses for not paying them well. Well, let's just be businesslike in this. If you get good people and you attract good people and you keep good people, you need less of them. It's that simple. I don't have anything more to say. You need less of them, but pay them better.
I'll just point out the expense of onboarding new people. When you're not paying enough and the benefits package isn't very attractive, folks are going to look elsewhere, not because they don't love the library, because they have a family to support. And that cost of onboarding new people from your director's standpoint, supervisor standpoint, is actually extremely expensive. So there's those kind of perhaps unintended consequences of underinvesting in your staff salary and benefits. It's actually a very expensive proposition to underfund this line in your budget.
I think if there's one phrase that I put in the handbook decades ago that keeps coming back, it's the first one. The director selects, the board appoints. By New York State Education Law 226, you are required to appoint and establish the salary for everyone. It doesn't say anything that you pick them. That's why you hire a chief executive officer. And so we encourage you to, most of the time, go ahead with what your director suggests. I mean, I know that there's some boards that want to know what the credentials are of a high school page. Come on. Maybe an assistant director, but or a department head. This is very simple. If you want to have a chain of command, if you don't want to run that library on a day-to-day basis, which is not your job, then you trust your director. And I've said this before, if you don't trust your director, that's another topic we'll talk about later. Those of you that especially are like in civil service, but even those of you who are not, it is perfectly legal for the appointment to be made after the fact. And this might not sound like it makes a lot of sense, but your director quite often will hire someone like a page, and they just bring them on board, get going. You need to fill a staff in. You have to trust your director to have enough judgment not to hire an assistant director without you knowing about it. But by the same token, they need to run the library. That means sometimes they have to bring somebody on board, and 2 weeks later they ask for your approval for a low to mid-level employee. Again, if you trust your director, that's fine. There is danger here, though, but because if you just decide not to approve that, then that was a risk the director took, and it's somewhat troublesome. Jumping into civil service, those of you that are under civil service, and there's a few of you in the audience tonight, I can see, a lot of you will make those personnel appointments pending civil service approval. It is very important you pay attention to civil service regulations. Your director, and I know many trustees, relentlessly complain about having to comply with civil service. Well, my answer to that is live with it. It's a rock in a stream. You flow around it. It'll move eventually, but it's going to take a few generations. You cannot and should not try to avoid civil service regulations. There are 109 different civil service jurisdictions in the state of New York. All have slightly different rules, but all basically hold you responsible for obeying the law. And civil service regulations and rules have the strength of law. And you, dear trustees, are personally responsible and accountable for compliance to civil service regulations. You cannot throw your director under the bus if you've approved something that was illegal. And you will not be insured by knowingly doing something illegal. That is negligence. So pay attention to it. Make sure your director understands it thoroughly. And if they don't, they invented a telephone 100 and something years ago. You call and pick up and talk to your local civil service. Trust me, they will help you. They're not the enemy. Rebecca, you want to talk about termination or?
Sure. I would say
Okay.
that this is when we talked before about the number one area of liability is in the realm of personnel. Unlawful termination is actually the number one reason that boards get sued overall. So when we talk about termination, in your mind, you might just be thinking about the director, but this is throughout the entire organization. Should be very clearly laid out in your personnel handbook. For those of you on the line that have a bargaining unit, you'll have this very clearly laid out for you, but most libraries don't have a bargaining unit. So it's really up to the board to have a very clear process in place that allows for the opportunity for someone to be given a second chance, unless of course they've broken a law that's very egregious, but there needs to be a process in place that involves evaluation, warnings, written, verbal, written, and then we're moving up the chain to possibly letting someone go, but giving people the chance to be successful when it's pointed out we've got a problem, but also supporting a director when they've like, we're at the end of our rope with this person is going to have to go, and making sure that's expedited in a fair and equitable way. When it comes to your director, we're going to talk in a few minutes about the importance of evaluation and communication. This really is something needs to be done with care and attention and compassion. So as we go through tonight, I'm sure this is one of the things that most trustees are most concerned about if they have situations in their library where folks are not working out. You do have the right to let people go when it's not working out, but you have to have communicated to them why it's not working out before you do so. While you have association libraries on the line tonight, which very clearly are at-will employers, firing someone in the dead of night who's beloved by your community is not going to go well for you as a board. So you want to have excellent documentation, both as a board or for the director in your organization who's dealing with a staff person who's a problem. You want to make sure you follow that policy that you've passed to the letter of the law, literally.
Yeah. One last thing to echo Rebecca's comments. Most of us are afraid to fire people because of, oh, they're going to sue us. And yeah, they probably will. If you let that rotten apple rot more, it's going to rot the core of your entire organization. It's very important that you pay the price and get rid of a bad toxic situation. It's not fun, but in the long run, it helps a lot because it will probably, if they deserved it, it will help morale. So don't expect it to be easy, but like Rebecca says, back your director up because you may end up paying some money just to solve the problem without admitting liability. But if it's a toxic situation, you need to do it and move on and pay the price. Nepotism and conflicts of interest. Session number 1, we talked about the duty of loyalty. You need to be loyal to the institution. That means you need, even though by law, the only people you cannot hire are your direct relatives, and that's direct relatives as officers of the corporation. So that's only the treasurer if you have one and the director. But the truth of the matter is, if you start peppering the library with your kids, which frankly a lot of places do, that's not in the kids' best interest or the library's best interest. And by the same token, if you have a lot of friends that work for the library, you need to be very careful and separate that because it definitely conflicts with a chain of command, and it actually makes your job a lot more difficult. So we caution you about that almost every time we've met. We caution you about keeping that separation between you and the staff as much as possible, because you're wearing a different hat and you have loyalty to the institution, not to those people. And if you can't deal with that, then you shouldn't be a trustee. Here's another list. If you've read the trustee handbook, you know what we're saying. You are hiring a CEO to run the library, not run the board, run the library, and they manage the operations and the staff. If you want to manage the operations and the staff, there are lots of library schools that would be happy to give you entrance, charge you a few bucks to get an MLS, and then have fun. And I know a number of trustees that loved the library so much they went to library school. Of course, they quit being a trustee and and they became darn good librarians. I actually know one that became, two that became directors, but they did it the right way. They did it in another library. The board's got to set the policies. Hopefully we're going to have a session on policies if we continue on next year. But that doesn't mean you got to make the policies up, of course. But you need to establish them. You need to review them. You need to make sure that the director reviews them with you, so there's no surprises. But they implement your policies, select personnel we just went through, recommends programs and services. That doesn't mean you can't recommend ideas to your director, but that's between you and your director. Obviously, over-informs the board. That was the first lesson I learned from a director who was a mentor of mine. He says, always give them too much information. Always give them too much information. And he meant that seriously. Too much is just enough. You need the director needs to be a spokesperson for the board. They're a partner for the library, rather. They're a partner with the board. And of course, if you're not getting good communication with your director, there's a problem there. You need to know what's going on. And some of us have and I developed a process whereby every Friday afternoon, I would send an email out to my board, say, this is what happened this week, just to let you know, because the worst thing that can happen to a director is something happens at the library and a trustee finds out about it at the supermarket. Unless it's really good news. If it's bad news, that's a problem. So I think it's important that there's a really good communication between director and all board members, not just the board president, although that's your primary liaison, but everybody needs to know what's going on pretty much all the time.
Jerry, your comment makes me think of a survey we did here in the Mid-Hudson Library System, probably over a decade ago now, but we had asked board presidents, what attributes are you looking for in a library director? Because we had a lot of new positions opening up. We were hiring new folks and coaching new directors. And right after no crying was no surprises. That's what they were looking for.
When I was retiring as assistant director, one of my board members said, what's the main attribute we should find in a next system director? And I said, oh, that's it. That's easy. Somebody that you can trust. The rest you figure they should know, but that's the hard part. And unfortunately, when sometimes over the years that trust doesn't stay as strong, and that becomes another issue that we will deal with in a few minutes, I guess. So. Okay. I said before, you get what you pay for. Again, several years ago, Nyla asked me to do a workshop on terminating your library director. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that. I'm going to do it on hiring your library director so you don't have to terminate them. The selection process is something that, let's just underline the last word, that it is in caps. Thank you, Rebecca. It's a process. It's not a quick and dirty thing because you don't have time or you can't be bothered. You need to work at it. It is far better to have an interim director or someone who's running the show, please not trustees, for a long time if you can't find the right person, and you need to find the right person. And of course, the first thing you need to do is write down what qualifications you are looking for. What are the challenges? And there's no one perfect out there, folks, but you need to say, do I need somebody who's good in finance? Do I need somebody who's good in politics? Do I need a person who's really good with personnel? What are your priorities? And then go through a full process. There's a lot of models out there. But I want to repeat something that we've said many times before. Please understand the weakest part of a selection process is the interview. I know that doesn't sound like makes a lot of sense to you, but those of you who are in HR understand that. You can fall in love with a pretty face that's not qualified to do the job. And please understand, a library director has two jobs. One, they have to work with you. And some people are really good at that. And two, they have to work with the staff and run the place. And some people are really good at that, but not everybody's good at both. So you need to balance that out when you're looking at folks. And, past performance is some kind of indication of future performance. So be aware of that, oh, we really like that, she's just fantastic. She really doesn't have any experience and she's never done a budget before. I've heard this from trustees a lot, but we can teach her. Yeah, there actually, I will say that I know a couple of successful young directors where the boards called me up when I was not even assistant director anymore and said, we're hiring this person, but we're making them go to your classes so they get some background. If you got it, it's fine. And that sometimes that works out because the person was willing to do it. So please, the process, and involve your library system, please. The system director should be able to provide you with information that'll help give you some background. Even if it's civil service, there's a process to that you need to understand. If it's not, you can have an intergalactic search. But remember, do your homework. In this internet age now, it's real easy to find the dirt on everybody. There might be a reason somebody wants to leave San Francisco to come and work in your place, besides forest fires. Accountability, you need to hold that director accountable for the success of the library. And that's part of the evaluation process that Rebecca's going to go into in a little bit. But you need to hold their feet to the fire. And that's part of it's something that you need. And an evaluation, please, not once a year. It's a constant process. And so if something is going wrong and you don't like it, honesty, again, is something back to the trust issue. You need to be able to talk to each other about that. Chain of command, you're the board, you're the governing body. The director is in charge, and it's important also for the director to let you know how the chain of command goes below them, because they're not there all the time. And as in any organization, who's in charge? And I have worked in libraries where on a Tuesday night, people are looking around, something happens, who's in charge? I think I became a director because I am. What the heck? I'm only been here 2 months, I'm in charge. But that's, honestly, you need to know that chain of command. Collective authority of the board. This is another thing we go on the handbook. You're not a partisan adversarial body. You're a collective authority, you're collaborative, you have something in common, and that is the good of the library. You're not there to fight each other over issues. You're there to come to a common cause, and that is supporting the library and what the library believes in, which is why, again, you need to have a mission that everybody understands and agrees with. Because then, at the end, you're going in the same direction, even though you might detour along the way. So again, if you don't like what the vote of the board was, please don't go to the newspaper and start complaining about it. That's not to say that you don't have the First Amendment right to express your opinion as a private citizen, but not as a trustee of the board. This is, again, it's not that kind of governance. So please avoid that. I did have one very honorable gentleman on a board that I had advised on a building project, and he simply said, I can't really support this. So let me abstain from the vote, because you're all going to vote yes. And then I'm going to just quietly resign from the board and sit back and watch you build a brand new library. I'll be so proud to visit it. But he couldn't, he in his heart, he couldn't do it, but he never said a bad word about it. And that was classy, I have to say. Rebecca, you want to take governance versus management, or have we beat that to death already?
We probably beat it to death, but I want to say that the governance versus management issue is really the #1 reason I get called in to consult with mediating issues between boards and directors. And we've talked about this several times in the course of this series of webinars, but just going back again to that idea of staying in your lane, right? That the governance side of the organization, the board, you are setting the plan, you're setting policies, you're setting the budget, And the director is manage the library on a day-to-day basis using your budget, your plan, and your policies to make day-to-day decisions in your honor, basically. So I think one of the really clear things you can think about when you're trying to figure out where the line is, and this is one of the questions, we got actually a bunch of questions leading up to tonight related to this very issue, because it can look like a very gray area sometimes of who does what. And Casey's going to share in the chat box, if he hasn't already, a link actually to the director handbook, which takes some of the roles and responsibilities and breaks them down a little further and shows you this is the actual task the director will do when it comes to policy making. And here's the role of the library board to kind of demystify some of those areas for you. But it's always a good thing to keep in mind that when you're telling the director how to do their job, you're often sliding into an area that you don't want to be in. You want to tell the director what the outcome is the board wants to see achieved, and you've hired them and provided money to hire their staff for their creativity and their knowledge and their library scientist minds to create excellent outcomes on behalf of the library. If the director isn't able to produce what you were hoping they would, they should be accountable and coming back to you and explaining what happened, whether it was just poorly executed, or there wasn't enough money to invest in the project, or some, I don't know, big thing happened like a pandemic. These things happen, right? But there should be a debriefing. We call them joyful funerals at Mid-Hudson, where we talk about why this thing didn't work. Okay, we're going to let it go, but we're going to celebrate the good parts of it, let go of the parts that weren't so great, and learn from that experience. But it takes that conversation. It's necessary to hold both sides of the equation accountable in those situations.
Yeah. I'm going to grab the employment agreements because this comes up a lot. And to be very forthright, you need to have something in writing between you and your director. It does not have to be a contract, although larger institutions, of course, do that and get very lawyered up about it. But it needs to be a memorandum of agreement as to what their benefits are, and hopefully a job part of their job description, is in there. But you need it in writing, and it protects you both. And if it feels awkward, too bad. Do it. It's just going to help you in the long run. And it will eliminate any misunderstandings, especially about benefits, which happens from time to time, because the director is a different class of employee than the other members of your staff, and may have different benefits than other members of the staff. And if they're not articulated clearly, they really don't have the right to them unless the board has literally in writing given them those benefits. And I'll give you a quick example. I know directors that just assumed I'll get the same benefits as everyone else until they decide to go to another job, and the board said, well, no, you don't accumulate any sick time. You didn't accumulate this. Where's that in writing? That's not fair to anybody. So please just put it in writing. As you know, handshakes are good. I had handshakes, but eventually I had contracts, and there's some models out there. They don't have to be too fancy, but they should also articulate a few things like a regular performance evaluation process, which will hold your feet to the fire. Because if you don't do that, well, then we're going to run into leadership changes in a minute or two. Conflict, if you can't be honest with each other, there's a problem. And sometimes there are board members that, and sometimes just an individual board member that doesn't like the director. And that's unfortunate, but it's real life. I had a colleague of mine once said, you haven't been a library director until you sat across the table for 5 years from somebody who hates your guts. Fortunately, I went almost to the end of my career without having somebody who was determined to get rid of me. Fortunately, he left well before then, because he was not, that was a crusade he was not successful in. But sometimes it's just personality conflicts, or sometimes it's just personal for some reason or another. So if it's like that, then the board president, hopefully, has got to make sure everyone behaves. Of course, the director cannot respond in any way, shape, or form. They can't return the conflict. If they do, then they've got a problem as well. So If that's the kind of conflict between you and the director, you need, again, that's an honesty issue. And if it is unreconcilable, then we go to the last term here on leadership changes. And Rebecca, you want to lead off with that because it's a tough topic.
It is so tough. It is one of the most, sometimes a very heartbreaking thing that it has to happen, either from a person who started out great and whatever's happened in their life has meant that they're no longer performing at the level necessary to make your library successful, or it's something that's just gone on for too long and then new trustees come on the board and they're like, what the heck is going on over here? They've got to do something about it. It's never a fun thing, obviously, but it is really important to address. If you've got that kind of situation, often you inherit that kind of situation when you come onto the board. And as you get to know the situation better, you recognize as director might not be as good a fit as you need for this moment in time. But it has to be done with humanity and compassion as we think through, has this person ever been evaluated? Has the board president been communicating realistic expectations to this person? Is there an up-to-date long-range plan that they've been operating under? So who truly is to blame in the situation? It's easy to blame the director for all of those problems, but we also have to have that reflection on the board's responsibility as well to make sure the director had direction and knew what they were looking for to be successful. Of course, there's other issues that come up that are personality conflicts or true performance problems that need to be addressed. So we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but I did want to jump back up the list on the chain of command issue, because I mentioned I was going to refer back to the policy page as we got a little further down the line here tonight. And that was the issue I wanted to use to bring you back to that policy issue. For chain of command, if you find yourself with a staff person who's not the director who approaches you and is looking for help with an issue or thinks a policy should be changed or really doesn't like, the direction of the renovation of the children's room, you can just smile and say, oh, well, thank you for, I really appreciate how much you care about the issue. You're going to need to talk to the director about that, because that's why you've hired the directors to manage that person and their displeasure with those issues. There's two exceptions to this. If you are approached by a staff person who has a harassment complaint about the director or a whistleblower complaint about any aspect of the financial handlings by the director, any of the staff, any members of the board, those are two things that should make you sit up straight, take attention, and get you on the phone to the board president very, very quickly and following your procedures and policies related to claims of harassment and whistleblower complaints as well. That is absolutely when you would have a direct dealing with a staff person. But in literally almost every single other instance, you can just say, oh, thank you for your concern. I'll let your director know, and you should talk to them about this issue and give your director a heads up that someone tried to do an end run around them and come to you. So you really want to be a teammate with your director when the staff might be trying to undermine the director by coming to you.
Thank you for bringing it up, Rebecca. And that it reinforces too that you're a team with your director. And please, and so leading into I guess our last slide, one thing about leadership changes, and like Rebecca, I've been brought in many times by boards that say it's time for the director to go. And the first question we ask is, and how have the evaluations been? Oh, well, there's two answers to that. We never do it, or for 25 years, they've been excellent. And all of a sudden they woke up and said, oh, it's time for him to go. So I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca to start with that, but it's just, and then we just shake our heads and shrug, say, good luck.
That is the exact same experience I have, almost to a T, 100% of the time when someone tells me they want to fire the director, and I say, well, let's take a look at the paper trail and the evidence you have to back up this decision. 100% of the time, there has not been annual evaluations done. There has not been routine communication with the director about their performance. There has not been expectation setting. There has not been an annual plan tied to the 5-year strategic plan. So everyone was on the same page about where we're going and why we're going there and how we're going to get there. So those component pieces that we talk about in the handbook all add up to tell the story at the end of the day about why something might be broken. So a really strong evaluation methodology in your organization is part of the puzzle. It's one of the puzzle pieces to making everything be very successful. And I insisted that this slide say both the library director evaluation and board evaluation, because you are a team co-leading the library forward. So an evaluation process should not be sprung on the director like, oh, by the way, we're going to evaluate you tomorrow night. We'll let you know how that goes. That is a major problem. There should be a discussion at the beginning of the year about what methodology will be used for evaluation. Your director should be consulted, be very aware of what form is going to be used. You should ask their opinion about the form that's going to be used. Lots of examples. We've got a couple of them curated on the Mid-Hudson Library System trustee topic page. You're welcome to go visit that and see what's there. But that needs to be agreed upon by both parties ahead of time. Timeline needs to be agreed on. Process needs to be agreed on, and it should be super transparent with the board and the director of how that's going to be carried out. All trustees should participate in that evaluation process, and the director should receive the written results of that process by either the executive committee or the personnel committee, or a team from the executive committee or personnel committee that explains the outcomes. Most of the time, my hope is that you have a wonderful director that's doing a great job, and you get to have a fabulous conversation with them that is just a verbal high five. You are just complimenting them on the work, telling them what great value they bring to the organization, asking them to keep up the good work, to let you know if they need something to be more successful. If you've got that kind of track record going when things are good, when things start to slide and you have to do an evaluation with someone whose performance has slipped or something abnormal is going on that routine conversations with the board president hasn't been able to course correct, you've already got that process in place, that methodology in place. You're not scrambling to figure it out in a time of what honestly might be crisis for your board or your organization. So when your director's doing a great job is actually the best time to implement an evaluation process. But again, hand in hand with that needs to go your board evaluation. We've got, again, samples of that available, I think, in the handbook, but definitely on the Mid-Hudson site for trustees. And you can use those tools, which are pretty universal for nonprofit boards. They actually do fit for library boards. I know we're all so special, but really they translate really, really well. Your director should be part of that evaluation process too. So we can reflect on how comfortable trustees are with their work. Are there things they don't understand about how things work, and give them a chance to say, I actually don't understand the finance reports, and creating a safe space for that to happen. So the evaluation of what I call both sides of the equation is really necessary on an annual basis to create the prescription for success for the coming year. And then when you've got that in place, again, it really saves you when things are not going so great, that you've got a process in place when all other avenues of communication to course correct a situation with the director have failed. When the board president's consulted with them, or they've been written up, when we get to the point of the annual evaluation resulting in the need for a performance improvement plan, that director should know that board's getting serious about performance and things need to change, or there's going to be an outcome they don't enjoy. So again, when things are going great, good time to put that evaluation in place.
One last warning before we close this slide out and all the slides. Those of you who are association libraries, yes, you are an employment at will institution, but the fact of the matter is, by the time you get around to wanting to terminate your library director, they will be covered by New York State and federal laws for a variety of reasons, such as age discrimination. Of course, you know, age discrimination in New York State begins at 18, not 40, like on the federal level. And there are plenty of legal firms out there that are more than happy to represent them. So if you don't have that pile of paper and the paper trail, you've got a problem. And even if you do, you're going to still have work in front of you. You will get challenged. People don't. A lot of folks that should have been going a long time won't go quietly. They've been trained by, oh, get it, make a deal, get a deal out of it. So anyway, be aware that no matter what kind of library you are, you can't just arbitrarily dump people. So.
Rebecca and Jerry, thanks for providing us that topic overview. Not only was it informative, but it also presents us with an opportunity to dig deeper into questions submitted by our library community members. We've got about 40 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is split the time between pre-submitted questions that we received prior to this evening and then also take some of those live questions. Before we get started, though, I just want to remind everybody that's joining us tonight, please submit all of your questions through that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Even if we can't get to your questions tonight, we're curating all of those questions so that we can address them in our after party session that we're going to share out with you in January. So again, please make sure you share out those questions as we go out to the night. So Jerry and Rebecca, are you guys ready to take some of these pre-submitted questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So this first one falls under the area of critical partnership, trustee and the director. The trustee handbook discusses specific roles of the director and specific roles of the trustees, but many of these roles share the same responsibility like budgeting, planning, and policy. Who is technically responsible for what?
I'll give that to you, Rebecca, since you wrote the director handbook.
Yeah, so I definitely got that question a lot from trustees. And so when I wrote when I had the opportunity to influence the director handbook before Jerry invited me to help with the trustee handbook, I took a run at itemizing some of those areas. So when we think about the ultimate authority in the library, all of it falls to the board, but you've hired a director to be your technical advisor. So let's just take the example of policy development. Your director is an expert. You've hired them for their expertise, for their connections in the library community, for their relationship with the library system, the New York Library System, the American Library Association. So having them draft policy or recommend policy to the board and bring that to a policy committee for the policy committee to react to would be the most expeditious way to work together on that project. Same deal with budgeting. Your director knows the ins and outs of all the bills, of how the library works, of how a goal set in the strategic plan will need to be invested in to be successful. So again, the drafting of the first run at something like your budget would be done by the director and brought to the finance committee for reaction to it. So ultimately, the board has to approve policies in the budget, but where you start those projects would be in the director's hands. With the agreement of the board, with a timeline and process agreed to by both parties.
So the second question also falls under that area of critical partnership. So is it considered micromanaging to make note of small things we've seen at other libraries that appeared to be helpful or useful for possible consideration? How can we discuss these things like programs or materials with the director or staff without sounding like we're trying to do the director's job? So it sounds like trustees are doing some benchmarking of libraries in the area. They're seeing some really good things happening, and they want to, bring that to the table so that maybe their local library can be doing the same types of things.
So they're doing their job.
Yeah, like you're not micromanaging to take a note, right? That's not micromanaging. What can be micromanaging is the way you choose to convey the note that you took. So I think that, giving a suggestion to the director appropriately is very important, but also being respectful that they may have a different opinion than you did about what's happening. So you have to decide if that's the battle you want to fight, or if you want to maybe suggest that get referred to a committee for conversation. But if it's a library operational issue that's clearly in the wheelhouse of the library director, you have to be very careful, I think, in how you convey that to them.
One thing to be aware of is, as Rebecca noted, just because you think it's a good idea, don't walk into the director and expect them to do it that day and implement that idea. If it's a good one, it'll stand scrutiny and debate, and it might be so good they do it right away. It might just be a great hint. Sometimes they'll want to take it to the rest of the board. So don't expect them to jump and salute as soon as you come in with a new scheme or idea. I mean, trustees are famous for going to conferences and coming back and you want to copy what everybody else does. So
I can't tell you how many calls I get after a conference, and it's a director. Luckily, they're good humored, like, well, Rebecca, one of my trustees went to your presentation and now they want me to do X, Y, Z. And we chat about it. Like, is it a good fit for your library? Why or why not? Does it fit with your strategic plan and what you're doing? Does it overrun the resources that you've been given to carry out the duties? Well, okay, then let's go back to the board and say, we're going to have to reprioritize if we want to do this thing as well. So there might be a conversation that's going back and forth, but I think picking your moment is really important. We talked about collective authority on one of the previous slides. your authority as a board lies in the collective, literally. So you only really have authority when you're at the board table and voting in an open meeting setting. So when you walk into the director's office, you are obviously a VIP, a very important person, very important patron, but you also have to be very cognizant of the power structure in your library and be very careful how you use that power, because of course your director wants to make you happy and to keep the board happy and doing good work on behalf of the community. But if you have a 15-member board like I do, and all 15 of them are walking in my door with a great new idea every week, I'd have no time to do anything else. So we have to also think about funneling ideas to a strategic planning scenario or process, and really bringing them up at appropriate times as well.
Yeah, and I really, oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Go ahead, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to mention, as a director that's been doing this for a while, I always appreciate feedback from trustees. It helps me get better at my position. But I think of things that Jerry talks about. There's always transactional work versus transformational work, and it's the transformational work. It's great that maybe that library has that fantastic year-round program that's going, but it took them months, if not years, to get that year-long program going. So to expect that turnaround right away is not always the first thing you need to expect from a director, but having the conversation is absolutely a great place to start.
One last comment in the question that you asked, it said director or staff. Just cross out staff. Stick with your chain of command, go to the director, and if the director says, hey, let's talk to the children's librarian about this, then you might be hitting a home run right now, but don't go directly to staff. That's just, don't do that. It's bad.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Rebecca. So moving on to the next pre-submitted question, and this falls under the arena of trustees and staff. So the board member wants to know, how involved can an unpaid board member be in the day-to-day activities without compensation? I think we just touched upon that a little bit, but should they be involved in building maintenance?
No, well, all right, I'm gonna, in the best of all worlds, you should not be involved in the day-to-day operations of the library, period. And something like building maintenance is, you're not emptying garbage cans. I'm assuming it means, say you need a new roof and the board member happens to be having a roofing company and has some expertise in that. If it's within that context, as because they have that level of expertise and they do it as a board member advising the director, not running the project, then you're fine. There are, I have worked with a few libraries where board members volunteer to actually do things like check books in and out. I believe Rebecca talked about this at our first session. That's dangerous. It's awkward. I really can't advise that. But one last comment before I throw this over to Rebecca. Understand, you cannot receive any compensation no matter what you do if you're a trustee and work at that library. That is against $1 is illegal. Please, that's very clear. Rebecca, I'm sure you have this, you've run into this more than I have.
I do, and I was thinking it's almost an upstate downstate issue, because upstate you're going to find this issue come up a lot, because for smaller, more rural libraries, it might be underfunded, chronically underfunded. A lot of times trustees step in just to make it work, to find a way to bridge the gap between what has to get done and the money you have to get it done. But that should be something that the board is working to sunset. So that is not the case. You've got a host of problems. You've got chain of command issues. You've got liability issues. You perhaps now are distracted doing the fun stuff, what you might think is fun, instead of the work that you have been elected to do, which is governing the library. And I speak with the utmost respect for trustees that do this work. I think I shared in an earlier session, my own dad was a library trustee. He was a board president. He first served on a board of our local library for 10 years. And he used to shovel the sidewalks. He would get those boots on, get down to the library as fast as he could, shovel that walk to make sure patrons could get in that day. And he was so resistant when he learned, when they hired a director that was, really trying to grow the library and expand them and protect them from a risk management standpoint. He took it so personally when they said, Bruce, you can't do that anymore. He's like, are they saying I don't do a good job? We're like, well, no, we've got all these issues. The insurance company's not so happy about this. We need to build a budget that truly covers the operating costs of the library. And this is like a hidden cost because the trustees are stepping up to make this happen. So think about the long-term investment of your time and where it's going to pay off the most. You might be able to bridge the gap when there's a problem, but your time spent solving the budget gap and making sure there's money there to hire someone to do that work professionally in a way that's covered by insurance and everything's nice and neat and clean, that's where your long-term time is going to pay off the most for folks. So again, said with the greatest respect and empathy for a lot of situations out there, but really keep your eye on the long-term game on that one. Oh, Brian, I think we got you on mute.
So the next question falls under the same category. Does a board's personnel committee have the discretion of what information is distributed to the board collectively? So I'm assuming the personnel committee is meeting, they're having conversations, what is hopefully in an open meeting. So the question is, when the board or the personnel committee comes back and meets with the board, are they sharing all that information out that they talked about in that open meeting? I would assume so.
So this one has I feel like there's a story behind this question that would be really helpful to know. But to Brian's very cagily word response there is the committee should be operating in a very open manner. Anyone should be able to observe what's going on in that committee meeting unless that committee has voted to go into executive session to have a private conversation where you might need to protect the employment history of a person being discussed. So I think there's a personnel committee should be thinking about, again, risk management, about what to report to the board. There really should be nothing hidden. So I really wish we had a little more information on this one, but I think they should be very transparent in their conversations, their output and decisions or recommendations rather that they're making to the board.
Yeah, I would add to that and simply say, if there's an issue that fits under that description where they believe it has to be dealt with in executive session, then deal with it in an executive session of the entire board. You really can't keep secrets from each other, because it must be an issue that your director brought to your attention. Unless you're talking about the director, in which case you really should be talking to the rest of the board. So no, I've heard this about other committees too, that they're keeping information that's power play. That's not being a good board.
So the next question kind of ties back to the previous question we asked about when it comes to, probably this happens in rural libraries where trustees want to roll up their sleeves and they want to help staff in certain situations. So the trustee asks, what is appropriate when it comes to trustees' involvement with individual staff members, such as planning for programs, working directly with them on projects, or on committees such as long-range planning? So there is no different than directors and trustees. There's also sometimes those gray areas where trustees and staff do come together, maybe in those environments where they're sharing space and a common mission or goal.
I'll break this is actually two different issues. If there's a board appointed committee that has staff on it, like for long range planning, that's great. But if it's just a trustee that wants to do story hours, and I think there's a conflict there about stepping into the work life of staff members. But on a committee basis, I don't see any problem at all. But I'll defer to Rebecca on the working directly with them on projects. That implies that they're not shoveling the walks, but
I totally agree. I just really agree with Jerry. I think those are two very different things that was described in that question. The board clearly has responsibility for the planning process and the outcome and delivery of a strategic plan, and input by the staff to that plan is critical. So as long as in that process, the roles are very well defined and the facilitator does a good job of structuring the activities related to gathering input and reactions to the development of the plan, that totally makes sense to me. I have the same reaction to Jerry about the helping with the program. I think that's, a lot of times there's the trustee might have the perfect connection in the community to produce a program. You should give the staff person that person's contact info, and they'll contact them and make that program happen. If the director comes to you and says, we've got this massive program, there's going to be much higher turnout than we expected, we need a couple more folks to come and help us manage the door count and the refreshment table. I'm thinking of pre-COVID times, I guess. And you might step in to help bridge that gap. But hands-on program planning, that's the staff's realm.
Okay, and now this next question, I know we took a look at it before we came here tonight, but we did want to touch upon it because we did think it was a valid and important question. But can you please talk a little bit about joining the New York State retirement system and its rules?
Yes, I'll be very quick. Done a lot of research on this. If you're not a public library, in other words, if you're an association library, this question is irrelevant to you. You cannot join. That's not to say there are not association libraries in the state of New York that have joined it, but they haven't joined it, I think, since 1956. The New York Public Library is in the retirement system, and many of our older association libraries downstate are as well. But that has not been acceptable for decades. If you're a public library, and there's very few, but if let's just say you're becoming a school district public library and you were an association library, you have the opportunity to join, but you don't have to. And that's almost sad because it's a very attractive benefit to offer your employees. But I know of one library where I went through this when I was a system director. When they looked at how much it would cost to join the New York State retirement system, they chose to go another way, which was unfortunate. Subsequently, they have joined it because they had recruitment issues, and they paid the piper. But it's not a difficult thing to join, but you need to be a public library. So if you are an association library that was not a member of the system and you become a special district library or a school district library, or don't even think about becoming a municipal library, please. Then you are eligible to join, but you are not required. But please give it serious consideration, and then go from there. It's a phone call away. That's all. It's just paperwork, and you got to write a check.
It's one of those investments. I'll say, we've had a lot of director turnover in the course of the pandemic and as we've moved through the past 24 months. And it's been heartbreaking to watch boards doing a wonderful search, looking for folks and finding a really good match. And when the person realizes they are not in the retirement system, they're out the door pretty fast. So to remain viable in the future, if you're a public library, I think it's something you have to have perhaps a multi-year financial plan to figure out how to get there. But it should be a goal. I think it should be a goal of the library, or to have an equivalent. I mean, you're not gonna get an equivalent, but you've got to offer a retirement plan.
Yeah, and going back to our original thing about getting what you pay for, none of us are really in this for the money. At least I can speak for myself. But the benefits are very helpful, and you're in it as a career. And yes, we're in it for the love, but eventually we need to pay the bills, and that includes benefits like health insurance and retirement, or at least some kind of Medigap situation. So be aware of that. And going back to helping, let's just say leadership changes, I can think of at least a half a dozen times where I met with a board that knew it was time for their director to go, but the director wanted to go, but was afraid because of their lack of health insurance at the time, and they just wanted a little. And I remember meeting with the board once when I brought this up, and one of the trustees said, "Oh, is that important?" And it was obvious that this person had never had to pay a health insurance bill in their life because their trust did it for them. And the director, she was sweetheart. She said, "Yes, I'm looking forward to retiring, but I'm afraid." And that night, and they were great. They took care of it right away. Yeah, it costs you money, but this person had given 36 years of her life to the library, and she just wanted a little help.
So that is a really good segue into the next question. Rebecca was talking about the importance of trying to recruit library directors as well as professional staff, and having that pension system is really important. The next question comes under selecting a library director. So we're presently hiring a library director. Do you have any resources you can provide for compensation structures or studies? And what are some of the best practices or steps we should use to recruit quality candidates, in addition to maybe offering New York State pension?
I'll kick off.
Yeah, Jerry had
Please,
prompted me
Linda.
before we started tonight on this one, so I just wanted to share that a lot of library systems in the state do salary and benefit surveys of the libraries in that system. So I would say your first stop is to check with your library system of what kind of data they have that can help you do comparisons to figure out if you're competitive or not. That's not the only place to look, though. Brian brought up a great resource, which is Bibliostat Connect, I hope I got that right, through the state library, which is available where you can see data, annual report data for all libraries in the state. And often your system staff can help you pull a report from there that will show you what organizations throughout libraries throughout the state are paying and offering and benefits for staff of a library that's comparable in size to yours. But you also have to look broader outside of the library land and look at your community and what is available in that area. Because I think particularly for different positions, as Jerry mentioned earlier, they might have an equivalency in a different organization right in your very own community. Are you competitive there? We did a salary study quite a while ago now. We had one of my 5 counties was having a lot of trouble maintaining a strong workforce of library clerks. And it turned out in that county, people were making more serving coffee at Stewart's than they were working at the front desk of the library. And so those boards were confronted with the reality that they were not competitive and had to figure that out. So I think those are 3 strong places to go to be figuring out, are you competitive or not? And you'll also see in the trustee handbook, we reference the living wage calculator, which is to really take a good look at what does it cost to live where your library is located, especially if you've got a family, and are you truly treating people fairly in terms of how you're paying them and compensating them for working at your organization.
In addition, your library system director is going to turn you on, or maybe even do the homework of helping you spread the word through various listservs and the library associations and whatnot. One caveat, which I hear an awful lot, from time to time, we see job announcements go out and they simply say salary commensurate on experience. You'll get a lot of useless resumes because they might throw it out and think that you're going to pay $150,000 and you offer them 45. They don't know. So I think it's fair to give them a range, a meaningful range, and be willing to stretch yourself a little bit for the right candidate, because trust me, the right candidate can make a huge difference in, number one, in the future of your library, and number 2, if you can sleep at night.
I think another tip when you're recruiting someone, especially when you think about your job ad, just remember, it's not just the candidate that has to sell themselves to you. You have to sell the library as a workplace to them. So in your job ad, you should be describing what's great about your workplace, what's amazing about the town you serve. Like, make people excited to be a part of your organization and coming to be a part of a team that's working there. If that's not the reality, if that would be like vaporware for you to be saying that about your library, that's also something to be thinking about, of how to make your place an attractive workplace where people want to be and want to stay.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's dive into some of these live questions that we've been taking. We are short on time, but all the questions have been obviously applicable and relevant, and all the information that both of you have been sharing has been extremely helpful to everybody that's participating tonight. So again, going back to the critical partnership trustee and director, the first live question that we have is, the handbook states that trustees should not confer with other trustees on library matters outside of board meetings. Are there things that the board president and the library director should not discuss outside of board meetings?
I'm not sure that the handbook says precisely that. It says we're not supposed to come to decisions outside of board meetings. And last month, we talked quite a bit about the ability to email back and forth about getting informed about issues, not deciding the issues, not coming to a decision, then showing up the meeting and voting. So I'm sure we say something like that, but I'm not sure that, I think that's a little taken out of context, that you should be able to talk to each other, and of course, the director, about anything. But you're not, don't get together and decide you're going to vote in a certain way at the next meeting.
I think to the second part of the question about the director and board president relationship and what they're talking about, that is a really critical partnership, as Jerry's famous webinar on the State Library website discusses in depth. I think the important thing is the perception, the optics of that relationship too. That of course there's like the routine, keeping each other in the loop of what's going on and preparing for meetings in a way that's productive and going to really influence the productivity of board meetings overall, or highlighting an issue that might have come up between board meetings. All those things are appropriate. But if it starts to look like there's a little insiders club between the director and the board president, and they're making decisions between themselves and just acting without input from the full board on topics that are very clearly board related, that's when things I think are messy. So it might not be so much the topic, but the manner in which it's spoken about and the timeline with which it's brought to the attention of the full board.
Yeah, the board president has more responsibilities, but not really more authority. And I concur exactly with what Rebecca just said. Yeah.
We talked about it in that critical partnership section as well, where that relationship and that communication between the board president and the library director is just so key. When we've seen that happen play out just over the last year and a half. So, and making certain that trustees aren't saying things that they shouldn't say to the director, it's always important. It just goes through that one channel of communication. So, so the next question, we're going to pivot a little bit and start talking about policies here. Given the large number of recommended personnel policies, would you recommend that the director start getting some model policies for the board to review? Our library may have some of these policies already in place, but I'm fairly sure we do not have all of them. So this goes back to that question that I think you clarified some stuff on, but who's supposed to be taking the lead here on policy development?
I still think the director is a good spot to start. They know a like-sized library to compare themselves to perhaps ask for an example of their employee handbook. There's also companies you can hire, like Emmett Hudson, it was actually our insurance company, overhauled our personnel manual to make sure it was in line with current law and actually complete. So I think there's two sources there, and the board can decide which route they want to go. But I think absolutely getting examples from other libraries of similar sizes makes a lot of sense as a place to start, but you can never assume they're up to date with today's law. Because as we've seen this year alone, I think I've seen more changes to laws that impact personnel issues than I've seen in 20 years happen this year. So you can never assume they're up to date when you're getting an example from another library.
Yeah. One last comment. The board shouldn't be writing the policy. They should be reviewing, asking questions, getting legal advice. But there are so many, your libraries, you got to learn from each other, copy, cut and paste.
Borrow.
Borrow.
But make sure that you're cut and pasting a good model for you. That's all.
Excellent. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump forward under the performance evaluation category. And I really like this question. So we talked about contracts a little bit earlier on. Can a board change a director's contract when it comes time for renewal? So, and I'm making some assumptions like compensation or benefits or anything like that. How does that look after the contract's up for renewal after the director's already been there?
The negotiation, right?
Yeah, they should. And if it's a contract that has an end date, or it has a it's a renewal date, if you will. And speaking as someone who had a contract, I usually had a 3-year contract, but we renewed it every year, so it kept stretching out over the 3 years. And I was very happy when they changed the terms because I got a raise. So if what seems to be implied is that they're taking things away. I mean, I'm sure it's hard negotiation giving them more, but by all means, you should change it. If you just have a memorandum of understanding, then you can do it at any time. A contract's a contract. That's got a date that you should comply with. If you're not going to comply with it, then be prepared to make some compensation.
I just think it's just not a directive, right? Like it's not just the board's say of what's in that contract. The director has to agree to that, or perhaps is looking for some changes themselves. So it's a negotiation, it's a conversation.
I think it also develops that healthy relationship between the director and the board. So when you guys talked about evaluation and it's something that has to be done every single year, the director wants that, the board should want that. No different with the contract negotiation. That's just a real opportunity for the director to show the value of their work over the last several years, and also for the board to acknowledge and recognize that, and then also kind of set the precedent or the vision for what we're doing moving forward, right? So going back to the category of selecting a library director, and I thought this was an interesting question. So I don't know if something specific is going on at a library, but is it important to have an assistant library director? And then on the opposite side of that coin, why are there reasons a director would not want an assistant director? So I'm not sure what's going on at that library, but can you guys provide a little bit of context?
I think it's usually
Well,
related to the size of
yeah.
the library, in my experience. When you have a larger organization, the director is spending more time in administration, and assistant director is spending more time on managing the floor operations of the library. So making sure the circulation staff has what they need and is managing an incident that needs to be escalated to management. In smaller libraries, often there isn't the budget for that kind of hierarchy. But I think I don't mean to underestimate boards' awareness of the work of a director, but many boards underestimate the amount of administrative work a director needs to do, and therefore expects them to be the face of the library and working at the front desk, which just puts so much pressure on the time of the library director. As to why a director would not want an assistant director, I think you have to ask them. But
Yes, please.
if the issue is I think it might be less about their opinion and more about the perception of is the work necessary getting done? And if the board's perception is that it's not, and they're asking the director to create an assistant director position, I think that's valid.
Yeah, and it means, and then the director might feel threatened, but we don't know the details of this particular situation. And it could be, remember, it's another person to manage. If it's a small library. That said, the board should know who's number two, even without a title. Because when the director gets COVID, who's running the show? Who's going to run the board meeting? You know.
So we're talking about personnel tonight, and so this might be the last question that we answer from the live portion, but I think this might be a good place to end if this is our last question. So is an employee handbook important? And then also, how did the director and the board work together to create that handbook, knowing the director might have firsthand knowledge of what should be in that handbook?
Well, I'm gonna just give a lot of credit to Rebecca here. You just saw a list of what should be in that handbook, in all of those policies. And then in addition to that, it's how do you operate day to day when it comes to things like breaks and calling in sick and vacation and things of that nature. There are so many models out there that you really don't have to create your own. Rebecca made a great suggestion. You can call around and like libraries and just say, hey, can I have a copy of your personnel manual? Copy it, but not verbatim, but you know what I'm saying. Use them. If nothing else, get the table of contents.
Usually a handbook, you've got your set of personnel policies, and the handbook integrates policy with procedure. So it might be the form to request time off, or the link to go to the software where you request time off, or the form to use for paid family leave. So it's just helping the employee operationalize your policy so they understand, when I need to use this policy, how do I use the policy? So I think employee manuals are critical, because you want that employee to sign off on them, that they've received it when they start employment with your organization. So they can't say they were never told about a policy or a procedure in the organization. So whether or not they actually read it is a whole nother story, but you want written proof they received it and it was given to them when they started their employment. So absolutely think it's important.
Rebecca, Jerry, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Do you have any last final comments you want to make before I close this out?
Well, I just wanted to reiterate that we're jokingly calling the after party for the book club, where the 5 of us on this team are going to be answering a lot of the other questions we weren't able to get to in the first 3 sessions here. So as Brian said, that will be available to everyone who registered in January. And then we are really pleased to announce we're going to continue this series in 2022. So there'll be 6 new sessions announced with dates in the same format that we've been doing here. And we just really want to thank you for the feedback you've given us. I want to thank you for everyone noticed I was under the weather last month and who sent me cards and flowers. That was so generous. But I just want to say what a good experience this has been. And a lot of it is not only because of the team I get to work with, but the people who are in the audience who are trying to learn more about the role that you have. So just want to close by for myself to say thank you.
And for me, just thank you it's an honor to deal with trustees that give their time and to help the institutions that we believe in. You know, we share a common mission in our lives and in our communities. So thank you. We've been doing this for a while, and I'm lucky enough to keep doing it for a little while longer.
And Rebecca and Jerry, I think you shared out everything that I was planning on sharing out, but I do want to say that I know I speak on behalf of our entire trustee handbook book club planning team. We appreciate all you do as trustees, and we genuinely enjoy doing this work with you. This is our lifelong profession, and you know it's our mission that's not realized without your service and your effort. So thank you everyone for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing all of you in January. And make sure you check out the website for that after party as well. Thank you, everyone. Take care and
Have
stay
a good night,
safe.
everybody.